Today on the Inside Scoop, Texas A&M moves into the #1 spot. Miami bringing in an insane amount of talent this weekend for visits. We're going to talk Ohio State, Tennessee. Both are heating up. So you guys, make sure you're subscribed. How are you watching and you're not a subscriber of this channel? If you're not yet, go ahead, hit subscribe. As always, I'm your host, Josh Newman. We got a big show. Let's get to it. Let's talk about the Texas A&M Aggies, because last night Mike Elko and that staff made a major statement with five-star edge Zyron Forstall, making it official. He committed to Texas A&M last night. We got Chad Simmons here. We're going to break this down. Now, I wouldn't say the decision itself was a surprise, but the timing of it, I mean, I had no idea that one of the top players in the country was about to come off the board. How did it all go down?
Yeah, I think you said it, right there, Josh. I mean, we all felt A&M was kind of setting the pace in this race, going back to his visit for game day back in the fall. The communication made him feel like a top priority. He's had some big talks with them already about them being the top school, what the future could look like in College Station. But look, he still had, some OVs coming up. He still had, Miami in play. He was at Notre Dame. Recently, some other schools in the mix, but he got back to A&M last weekend. The word started to leak out that maybe he told Elko and company he was going to be part of this program. We all started kind of putting pieces together, talking to different sources, and obviously it happened on Tuesday night. But again, just capitalizing on getting guys back on campus. Elko and that staff did that with Forstall. They had the momentum. They had the lead. They closed the door this past weekend.
Yeah, and they went from, I think they're sitting at number 4 or 5 up to number 1. So currently in the top 5 in reverse order, we got USC, Texas Tech, Ohio State, Oklahoma with 20 commitments at number 2, and then Texas A&M with 11 commitments at number 1. And Chad, this is something that we've kind of been teasing throughout this offseason, that Texas A&M would indeed compete for the #1 class in America. Now they have the #1 class in America, and they are not done yet. Heck, they might not be done at IMG Academy either. That's where Zyron Forstall goes to school, and there's some other major targets still at IMG Academy that Texas A&M's after.
Yeah, I mean, the one to watch for sure, and they have momentum there too, is wide receiver Eric McFarland. He's back actually on campus as we record this right now, Josh. And look, I don't know if they can close the door on this one too when he's back on campus, but they go into this visit as the team to beat. He's supposed to be at Miami this weekend. He's from the West Coast in Las Vegas. USC is a player here. Ohio State's on that list as well, but everything starts in his recruitment, with the Texas A&M Aggies. Wide receivers coach Holman Wiggins doing a great job there. His resume of developing playmakers, he kind of sees that comparison from Mario Craver last year to himself, Eric McFarland. So A&M, they want to be successful all over the country. No better place to start than IMG Academy, full of blue chippers every cycle.
All right. Yeah, no doubt. IMG Academy is a great pipeline to have, and it looks like the Aggies are tapping that right now. Let's talk more five-star intel. #1 linebacker out of the Tampa Bay area, Caden Henderson. He's been on everybody's radar this offseason. Why do you think A&M has a good shot to land him?
Yeah, I mean, right there, like an hour north or so from IMG Academy. So if you go to see a guy like McFarland, a 4-star, make a stop at Tampa Jesuit while you're at it and see Caden Henderson. But he was back on campus as well the same time Forstall was just a few days ago. And I think this is kind of heating up to be a Texas A&M versus Miami. Does he stay home? Does he go play SEC football in College Station? Look, Ohio State's still in there. He was at Tennessee just a couple of weeks ago. Alabama's in the mix. Multiple schools would love to have Caden Henderson, but right now the two schools with the most buzz are A&M and Miami. He's been there multiple times. He loves Elko, being a defensive-minded head coach. He loves that scheme, the fit in the defensive scheme, a chance to play early. He sees that as an opportunity as well in College Station. So, look, depending on who you talk to and what day of the week it is, the vibe is either A&M leads by a little bit or Miami. It's kind of back and forth between the Aggies and the Hurricanes. I think right now that's the path we're going down. When he commits, likely end of June, early July, the Aggies have a great chance to pull one of the best in the country in Caden Henderson.
All right. Now, when you look at the Aggies commitment list, their DB class is loaded. They have 3 elite defensive backs already committed. But, Chad, there's a pair of 5 stars on the board in Joshua Dobson and John Meredith at the cornerback position. Could the Aggies land both? Which one do you think right now they're maybe in better position with?
Yeah, could they land both? Yes. I think that's easier said than done,
Right.
but I
Yeah.
do think I feel very confident saying they land at least one of that combination. John Meredith, I think Meredith's probably the more likely today, being an in-state guy. He's back on campus here in a few days this week, and he's been there, numerous times, has those relationships. Again, in-state kid. He's been a priority from day one for Elko and that staff. I think they're clearly the favorite, the team setting the pace with Dobson, an elite player from North Carolina. LSU's in play. South Carolina made a big move. Shane Beamer and company just a few weeks ago, getting him back on campus. Other programs are involved there, but yes, they're at least 1, 2, 1, 2, 3 on both of these guys' lists. I think they lead for Meredith in that top 2 or 3 for Dobson. I would lean towards Meredith being the most likely guy to end up in this class, but look, don't count out A&M for anyone this cycle.
If they land 1 or 2 of those guys, you're instantly talking about Texas A&M competing for the best DB class in America, as well as some other positions. So Texas A&M recruiting heating up. We will be continuing to talk about the Aggies. So Texas A&M fans, make sure you're subscribed. All right, I want to ask about 2 more elite prospects before we get out of here. One on the defensive side of the ball, one on the offensive side of the ball. Edge Mekhi Brown. He's on the East Coast, I believe from Connecticut, but he's emerging as one of the most coveted pass rushers in the country. USC's heavily involved there as well. Why do we think Texas A&M has a shot here?
Well, they got him on campus, number one. They hardly ever fail. If they get a recruit on campus to College Station and do a great job really showing them about the program, going over X's and O's, the fit, getting them around some players. He was there for a multi-day visit this past weekend, and he's been everywhere. He's been to, I think, Florida, North Carolina, USC, Ohio State, Tennessee, over half a dozen schools already in the month of March. I think he has 7 or 8 more visits coming up in April. So he's really going through school by school, seeing who checks the most boxes. I can say with confidence, A&M checked a lot of boxes for Mekhi Brown. I think they will get, well, I'm pretty sure they get an OV from the dates are still kind of being lined up and worked out. But I think USC, A&M, Ohio State are 3 schools to watch kind of coming out of these March visits. And A&M did a great job with him, kind of showing him the fit as a pass rush guy in their defensive scheme. He loves seeing the team work out, the structure, the detail there under Mike Elko. And again, a very, very strong first impression on Mekhi Brown for Texas A&M.
All right. Now, the last name I want to hit on is Kennedy Brown. Not exactly an unknown name. Should be a very well-known name for Texas A&M fans. In-state offensive tackle. It almost seems to me like, when can Texas A&M close out this recruitment?
Yeah, I see him kind of the same way I see John Meredith, Josh. I mean, they're both in-state guys. Kennedy being on the Houston side, A&M does a great job in that area recruiting every cycle, not too far from College Station. And he's been there, again, countless times. He's a guy that has a connection with the staff. Almost every member of the offensive staff he knows extremely well, has that connection. I think, again, like Meredith, letting the process play out, taking the trips. He's a national recruit and elite offensive tackle. Other programs are in the mix and on his list. But again, like Meredith, we see A&M setting the pace and in the end being hard to beat.
All right, Aggie fans, you talk with us. Who is next? There's so many big names still left on the board. Aggies are rolling. There's room left in this class. Like I said, 11 commitments, kind of a lot right now, but Oklahoma in second place with 20. So still about half of this class left to fill. So talk to me in the comment section below. Who is your top target for Aggie recruiting? Let us know. Let's talk Canes recruiting because Miami is gearing up for one of the biggest recruiting weekends in the Mario Cristobal era. We got EJ Holland here, and EJ texted me yesterday. He said, Josh, there's going to be an insane weekend. I was trying to find the words. You used the word insane, and I said, EJ, let's film a video. So here we are. Let's get it going. Big names on campus. Who are you tracking, EJ?
Yeah, first of all, Josh, this is an insane list. So, I mean, we're tracking like 30 names here, man. I haven't seen a list like this in like 10 years. Certainly not at Michigan, maybe a little bit at Texas. What Mario Cristobal and his staff are doing on the recruiting trail on the heels of a national title appearance is insanity. Just look at this list. So Miami has a chance to put together a really, really special class, and that starts this weekend. And you look at the 5 stars. Mark Matthews coming in, number 3 overall recruit in the country. A lot of buzz around Miami, obviously. You know, he's a St. Thomas Aquinas kid. Miami doing everything they can to keep him home. He may be the most important target on the board this cycle. I think that Texas A&M has gained a little bit of positivity there, I guess you could say. I think A&M has emerged maybe as the biggest threat to Miami. There are a few other schools involved there. Mark keeps his recruitment fairly quiet, doesn't do a ton of interviews or anything like that, plays things close to the vest. But look, Miami has him back on campus this weekend. They had him at Mario Cristobal's house for 305 Day. He had a chance to see Nick Lanier commit. And if you remember, Josh, after that event, I told you, hey, the pool party in April is the perfect event to get Mark Matthews committed to Miami. That would be a big splash on the Big Splash weekend. So I think that I think Mark Matthews is one we're following closely, despite, Texas A&M trying to make a move there. I still think Miami is the team to beat in this recruitment, and this weekend could go a long way in helping the Canes close with Mark Matthews. Of course, DJ Jacobs, massive name on the list, 5-star edge, committed to Ohio State. I met with him in Atlanta in February, and he told me, hey, Miami's still pushing, I'm still talking to them a little bit, and now he's set to be on campus. Anything can happen there. If you remember that one, Josh, he was considered a Miami lean all the way up until his commitment announcement, and then picked Ohio State. So I don't think that one's over, and it shows with him making his way to campus.
EJ, I feel like the DJ Jacobs is the recruitment that we're going to be following. There's always like one recruitment where Miami just takes a huge swing. Sometimes they land the guy, sometimes they don't. Jeremiah Smith, but this DJ Jacobs one, it feels like Chris Henry Jr. last year, all the way down to the wire. Miami stays in it. I just feel like this DJ Jacobs one is going to go all the way down to the wire, unless you think something crazy could happen this weekend.
I'm not sure if something crazy will happen this weekend, but I agree with you, Josh. I think this one goes down all the way to the wire. The names that you mentioned obviously didn't end up at Miami. Maybe this one does. The edge position is one where, hey, Miami already has a lot to sell in general, but I think the edge position is one that's so interesting because you have 2 potential first-round draft picks coming out, Ruben Bain, Akeem Messidor. That really moves the needle for a guy like DJ Jacobs. You have one of the best to ever do it, Jason Taylor, a Hall of Famer, coaching you up and developing you. I mean, Miami has a lot to sell to pass rushers, and I think that catches DJ's attention. If you have ever met DJ Jacobs, he's not your usual 17-year-old. He's a very well-spoken kid. He actually values the academic side too. Miami, being a high-level private school, I think that'll move the needle with him. So just getting him back on campus, getting him to this big event, getting him in front of the staff with a bunch of other of his peers, I think that definitely will help Miami this weekend.
All right, talking about big swings out of the state of Arizona this weekend, the number 1 quarterback in America, Will Menzel, will be on campus. We've been talking a lot about Canes quarterback recruiting. Will Menzel's name has been slowly creeping into that conversation. Now he's on campus this weekend. What do we think?
Yeah, Will Menzel's an interesting one, man, because he does have South Florida ties. He actually lived in Fort Lauderdale from the time he was in 4th grade to the time he was in 8th grade. So, a good amount of his childhood was spent down in South Florida. He still has friends that are actual Miami recruits. Jaden Carey's a Rivals 300 defensive back from St. Thomas Aquinas. They're childhood friends. They'll spend some time together at the pool party this weekend. So, yeah, I think that those ties certainly help. Miami is in his top 4. He told me at OT7 over the weekend that he's planning to make a decision this month. So, Oregon has gained a lot of buzz. Oregon does get his last visit. If I had to pick a school today for Will Menzel, it would probably be Oregon. At the same time, Miami has a chance to make a major move this weekend. What's really interesting about Miami quarterback recruiting is they have all of their top targets coming in this week. So Will Menzel won't be the only quarterback on campus for this event. Davin Davidson, Rivals 300 quarterback out of Sarasota, Cardinal Mooney, he'll be on campus. Florida's gained some buzz there, but Miami is, the superior program in the state. So, they could make a major move with Davidson. They also have Israel Abrams on campus right now, top 100 quarterback out of Chicagoland. There was some Auburn buzz for him early on. That seems to have cooled down a little bit. So the door is wide open. And then you have kind of a little bit of a wild card. Peter Bork expected to be on campus tomorrow, top 100 talent who was previously committed to Michigan. They obviously had the coaching change. The doors completely open there. And he, like Will Menzel, has some ties to South Florida. His grandparents still live down there. He has a cousin who's a cheerleader for the Canes. So I think Miami has risen as a legitimate player for former Michigan quarterback commit Peter Bork as well. So any of those 4 guys, I would love to see in the green and orange. They're all very, very talented, 3 top 100s. It wouldn't be surprising to see Davin Davidson finish in there as well. So quarterback recruiting, major storyline to follow this week.
Yeah, Miami fans, you guys tell me, who should be the top target at quarterback? Is it Will Menzel? Is it an in-state name? Who do you want the Canes to sign? Talk to me in the comments below, but we're not done with this segment yet. I got to ask you, who else do you have on commit watch? I know you mentioned 5-star Mark Matthews, big splash weekend, big guy, but it all fits. But who else are you watching this weekend on commit watch?
Well, Josh, just to give you an additional note on those quarterbacks, man, 3 of them want to decide this month. Israel Abrams told me he's deciding shortly after the Miami visit.
Yeah, could be within the week.
Yeah, Davin Davidson too, but potentially within the week. Will Menzel within a couple of weeks. So
do you feel all right? We'll get back to the commit watch. But do you feel like there's a bit of like, hey, we're going to bring in all of these quarterbacks at the same time so they can see how serious we are about all of them? So one of them is going to take this spot this weekend. Like, is there maybe a little strategy behind bringing all these arms in on the same weekend?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's like, hey, we have this spot. All of you are great. And like I said, I think Miami, would be happy with any of those guys. I as an evaluator, would be happy with all of those guys. They're some of the best arms in the country. So, yeah, I think there's a little bit of like, hey, we're bringing you all in. All of you guys are priorities. Who wants to jump on board and be Miami's quarterback this cycle? So you could see a commitment come at that position shortly after the weekend comes to an end.
Yeah. So when it comes to commit watch, 2027, 2028, I got to think locally, especially with all these names on campus, there's somebody you're watching.
Well, Josh, what if I take you nationally? What if I take you all the way to St. Louis?
Let's do it.
St. Louis running back Myson Johnson-Cook is set to be back on campus. He just made a visit last month, spent time at Mario Cristobal's house as well, where Nick Lanier committed. And yeah, I mean, I think Miami has a chance to really move the needle in that one. Steve Wilfong, who you talk to all the time, obviously, he mentioned he has his prediction on Mizzou. But It wouldn't be surprising if he flipped it to Miami.
Yeah, Texas has been turning up the heat. He made a recent visit there. He's moving up their running back board. They're making him a priority. So there's a lot going on. Myson Johnson-Cook is one of the most coveted running backs in America. Even if he's not the number 1 running back in America, he's being recruited as such.
Yeah, and I mean, back-to-back visits here for Miami, though. They're trending well. And Steve mentioned, I could move my pick from Missouri to Miami depending on what happens this weekend. I agree with him. Don't be surprised if I put in a pick with Steve for the Hurricanes this weekend. The Miami does have a new running backs coach in Fabian Upshaw. He's young, but he does have NFL experience. But, more importantly, I think, if you're running back, you're an elite running back, you look at what Miami does in the trenches, how they're recruiting offensive linemen, how they pound the rock, their commitment to the run game. You saw what Mark Fletcher did last year. So I think, Myson Johnson-Cook, if you're looking for a national guy, he's a possibility. You mentioned, locally, if they push for maybe a guy like Travoris Finley, who's a 3-star edge out of Miami, Carroll City, he could certainly be one. He's a teammate of Nick Lanier. I think, in the 2028 class, Tremont Isaac, he's a top 100 wide receiver out of Miami, Chaminade Madonna, same school as wide receiver commit. Amari Stevens, if they really push for an early commitment, that one could potentially be one to watch. So, yeah, I think there are a few maybe not as high-profile guys that could certainly jump on board this weekend, but you could also have those big fish. You could have a Myson Johnson-Cook. You could have a Mark Matthews jump in. You could maybe have a Jamar Thompson jump in, Rivals 300 defensive lineman out of West Boca. Miami's been considered the leader there for a little while, just named his top 5. So, I wouldn't rule it out. When you have these huge recruiting weekends where there's so much going on, where there's so much excitement, you can get guys to decide sooner than expected. Right. So, we're really watching a lot of these guys. And, this list is just so stacked, Josh. It's so stacked, Josh, that we're already who knows how many minutes into this segment, and we haven't even talked about guys like 5-star cornerback Joshua Dobson, or the number 1 overall player in the country in 2028, Jet Harrison. Like, this list is absolute insanity.
Yeah, so big that I am just going to go ahead and pencil you into Sunday's show, because we got to recap the fallout from this weekend. And on Sunday, it's going to be more like instant reaction. I think there's so many names on campus. We're going to be talking about this for a while. But anyway, you're right. We didn't talk about Marcus Fakatu. We didn't talk about Juju Johnson. We didn't talk Jaden Upshaw. Jackson Dollar, one of the best tight ends in America, is going to be down in Miami. So a lot to talk about on Sunday. We'll be back with EJ for more. But until then, you guys, who's on commit watch? I want to see how good are you guys as recruiting experts. Who do you think Miami lands coming out of the weekend? Let me know. Comment section below. We are talking Ohio State. It's been a fun spring. A lot of guys coming through campus. We got Jeremy Birmingham of Letterman Row here. We're going to go behind the scenes. Some of the bigger names, some guys that might be on commit watch. So let's just get into it. Jeremy, we're in week 3 of Ohio State spring practice. So who have been some of the more important names that have made it through Columbus?
It's been a very active couple of weeks for Ohio State. The Buckeyes chose to avoid doing January junior days and stuff like that because, as Ryan Day said on Tuesday during his weekly press conference, they really want recruits around the country to see them practice. They want to see the coaches work. They want to see what the players look like. They want to see them when they're in the middle of it all. And so the Buckeyes have waited until March. As you said, we're into week 3. They have had a number of big-time players on campus over the last few weeks. That started right away with practice number 1, which had guys like Marcus Fatakau on it and Sean Curry, Caden Moss, 5 stars from California, Mississippi, all over the place. And then breaking that down into 2028 stars like, Jameer Miles from Illinois. The Buckeyes are really trying to make sure that they are covering all their bases. And so they've had 7, 8, 9, 10 dozen or more players on campus for each practice. That really took a new life last weekend when you saw guys like DJ Jacobs on campus, Asher Giotto in the class of 2028, Mekhi Buchanan, a 2029 running back from California that they had on campus, Lorenzo McMullen, a highly ranked 2028 receiver from Ohio. And then you had Grant Haviland from Georgia. You had Dominic Black, Cam Wagner, Brody McNeil, Kellen Weimer, Mason Wild, all these guys who are Ohio State commits. You had Bryce Woods, a top target at cornerback for Ohio State in the class of 2027. You had Miles Smith, a rising defensive end from Michigan that they really like. And then Jet Harrison, the number 1 ranked player in the class of 2028. They've had pretty much the full gamut covered when it comes to offense, defense, 27, 28, 29. There's really no stone unturned. Another huge weekend coming up this weekend, which I know we'll talk about, but Student Appreciation Day and the opportunity for the Buckeyes to really put some fans in front of the recruits as well. So it's sort of a spring game light weekend coming up for Ohio State.
Yeah, Buckeyes really hitting it hard in 2028. To me, it means they feel good about 2027. And last year around this time, obviously Ohio State was coming off the national championship win. Recruiting wasn't really getting cranked up yet. And in the end, once you kind of took a step back after the cycle was over, you saw why. Ohio State wanted to keep some spots open because starting in about mid-October, they just started plucking guys from other teams' commit list, kind of one by one. And you're like, oh, okay, this is what Ohio State's doing. They're going to fill this class up with superstars. It's just going to be at the very end. Do you get a feeling that it's going to be similar this cycle? Is it going to be a little bit slower of a spring in terms of taking on commitments?
I think it is. I mean, right now they have 9 commitments, so it's not like they're sitting there with 1 or 2. They've got a couple, big time guys like DJ Jacobs, Jameer Brown, Kellen Weimer, et cetera. Players that they really love, like Eli Johnson out of Texas, the safety. They really are just not in a position right now where they want to rush. And some of that is because of what they did a year ago. Some of it is just understanding the changing landscape of college football. And the fact is, who's committed in May and March and April doesn't really matter anymore because of the way that the game is played and the way NIL handles things. So for Ohio State, they're looking to build relationships. Everything right now is really geared towards the June official visit season. That's when they want to have 75 to 80% of their class done. And then in September, October, they'll go to the senior evaluations and check out some tape. And as you said, that's what they did a year ago. They went into signing day last year with 28 commitments, which is the most that Ohio State's had in the internet recruiting era. And so they realized that they have to build these classes a little different. So Mark Pantoni and the Buckeyes have kind of tiered it off a little bit. It's not 5 stars, 4 stars. It's first day picks, second day picks, third day picks. And that's really the way Ohio State's trying to build. They understand you're going to have to pay the first round picks. And if you want them, you got to get in on them early, like DJ Jacobs, for example, or the guys that you maybe want to evaluate and hope you get it right later in the cycle, like the Buckeyes did last year with guys like Kamari Bing, Caden Gephardt, et cetera.
Yeah. Nothing that Ohio State does in recruiting is by chance. Everything is calculated. Everything is considered. So when they go to make moves, it's always interesting to kind of just look back and see what happened last year and maybe, hey, this is going to repeat, because Ohio State always kind of on the cutting edge of strategy when it comes to recruiting. So that being said, let's circle back to current day. Who is expected on campus this weekend? It sounds like another big recruiting weekend for Ohio State.
Yeah, it's a big one. We'll see Olubabula, the New Jersey offensive lineman, for the first time. Ryan Robbins, a rising 3-star offensive tackle from Pennsylvania. The Buckeyes are pretty high on. But then you really get into the big names. You've got defensive linemen like Braden Parks and Kazi Curry coming in from California. Braden Parks from Illinois. You've got Chris Whitehead coming in from Virginia. You've got Quentin Cipher, the Buckeyes prize linebacker commitment, coming into town, and he's going to be tasked with recruiting 5-star-ish Caden Henderson. AJ Randall, a high priority linebacker target for Ohio State. Those guys are going to be there. And then you also have rising 2028s like Malik Muhammad from Georgia, Cameron McGee, Kellen Hall, Shamar Evans. I mean, it is a big, big weekend. And then the Buckeyes are also going to host Champ Mons this weekend, the quarterback who reclassified into the class of 2027, which is just an interesting discussion altogether, because they obviously have Brady Edmonds committed, and he's been as big a cheerleader for the Ohio State recruiting class as one could be. But looking ahead, the Buckeyes think that there's a possibility they may need a second quarterback in the class of 2027. The one guy they really liked early in the process was Teddy Gerard. He reclassified and went to Notre Dame in the class of 2026. So now they've been put in a position to reassess and readjust the quarterback priority board. And Champ Mons will be the first one in the class of 2027 to get some more attention from the Buckeyes. Brady Edmonds was just on campus 3 days ago and left, feeling pretty good about where things are. So we'll see what the Buckeyes do there. But there's going to be a ton of names that pop up over these next couple of days. But even if you just think about the defensive ends with Chris Whitehead, with Kazi Curry and Braden Parks at defensive tackle, and then the linebackers are really a focus this weekend for James Laurinaitis.
All right. So I know I just gave this impassioned speech about patience and how Ohio State's going to rack up late, but on the other hand, they're very intentional with who they're bringing in on campus. These are priority targets. And if one of these guys wants to commit, they're not going to turn him down. So do you see with the big visit weekend on tap and, this being midway point of spring, do you see any potential commitments this weekend?
One guy that I kind of have on my radar, and it may be a little bit premature, and he's not a guy that is someone that people are really talking about all that much, is California wide receiver Blake Wong, who will arrive at Ohio State in a couple hours from now. He'll be on campus till Friday. He's been very, very close with the Buckeyes for a long time. He's been was a priority for Brian Hartline, but he was also really, the recruitment began with assistant receivers coach Devin Jordan, who really grew that relationship. And this will, I think, be Blake's like 5th time on campus coming in from NorCal. He's someone that I think, especially with the recent emergence of Brock Boyd and the Ohio State roster, which is a guy that everybody in Columbus is talking about like crazy. I think you see a little bit of a similar style of play and a similar style of athlete with Blake. So if Cortez Hankton were to push, and this is really the question, because Jameer Brown is committed and the Buckeyes have some big targets on tap, guys like Manchin Sales, who they think might show up this weekend. Players are still trying to get in on like Dakota Garant and see if they can get him back. I wouldn't be surprised if they decide to get aggressive with a kid like Blake and say, hey, like let's see what you can do here. But they really are not focusing on pushing a lot of kids to try to make that decision yet, because they know so many kids are making visits elsewhere right now, and they're frustrated a little bit because they thought they'd have Max Hiller, the 5-star plus offensive lineman, on campus today. Max's brother, who is a big-time basketball prospect in the class of 2028, is running a basketball camp, so Max couldn't make it. So they're trying to see if they can get him back for this weekend. He's coming off of a very important visit to Florida that he just took that saw some RPM movement. So they're trying to fix that one a little bit if they can. But there's not a lot of guys that they're pushing for, knowing full well that most of the real discussions, and by that I mean the NIL discussions, are not coming until June.
Yeah. Most of the highest of high-profile guys will be coming off the board June, July. We'll see a little bit more in August, but that's kind of the big recruiting months of the cycle now. So you mentioned coveted edge DJ Jacobs, who committed to Ohio State over Georgia, over Miami, was back on campus. Good to see him back on campus. But this weekend, he's going to be down at Miami. Now, we've seen it last year with Chris Henry Jr. We saw it with Jeremiah Smith. There's been others, but Ohio State, they dabble in these 5-star waters, and other teams aren't going to let up on their commitments. So DJ Jacobs back at Miami this weekend. What should the level of concern be for Ohio State fans?
I don't know how we properly sort that out, but I mean, it's a concern. DJ has told people around the Ohio State program that he's going to support his brother Dawson, who's going to be there on a visit, but it's a huge weekend at Miami, as I'm sure has already been discussed on this show. They've got a lot of things going on with Mario Cristobal's barbecue or whatever they're doing.
Big splash weekend, Berm. Get it right.
My apologies. Again, we're up here in the Great White North. Right. You look outside; it's still snowing. We're not worrying about pool parties yet. It is a little bit of a concern, obviously, because Miami is one of the 2 schools that we've heard about for DJ from the start, and especially as a potential or likely location for one of his official visits. When he committed to Ohio State in December, it was a major shock because literally everybody thought he was going to pick Miami, except for a couple guys inside of the Woody Hayes Athletic Center. So it's a concern. It shouldn't be a concern as in like you're going to have a flip coming out of this weekend or anything like that. But anytime you have your highest priority recruits on a campus somewhere else, there's reason to be concerned. And again, the existing relationship there is real. It is one that Miami does a great job. They are extremely aggressive when it comes to NIL. But as you said, Ohio State's been in these fights a few times, and they generally do a pretty good job of holding off even the most aggressive suitors when it comes to a player that they really want. And DJ Jacobs is a player that Ohio State is not just building their 2027 recruiting class around, but trying to build their defense in 28 and 29 around. So they know what value he brings, and they have made that clear to Jacobs and his family. But that doesn't mean you're not going to have to ward off more of these conversations from schools like Miami, Georgia, where he's a legacy, et cetera.
Exactly. All right. Great info here on Ohio State recruiting. It is a busy week. It's going to be a busy weekend. Berm, thank you for dropping by the Inside Scoop. You guys go to Letterman Row. There's way more information up there. Let's talk Tennessee recruiting, because there is momentum building in Knoxville. Tennessee landed a big commitment. We're going to break it down. Now the Vols are up to number 14, so inside that top 15, only 6 commitments, so a lot of room for additions in this class. we got Chad Simmons here. Let's recap the big commitment earlier this week. 4-star wide receiver Keyshawn Bowman, a one-time Oregon commitment who the Ducks would love to have back. He made his second decision. He's from Nashville, Tennessee. He's a volunteer. He's now Tennessee's highest rated commitment. How did they get it done?
Yeah, for me, Josh, it kind of came, full circle. I think if you go back to the very beginning of his recruitment, Tennessee was viewed as the favorite, the front runner, the early leader, team to beat, in-state program, been there a lot. Mom knows the staff, he knows the staff. All of those things put Tennessee in a great spot right away. When he committed to Oregon, kind of out of the blue, he had been there, loved the staff. Obviously, Oregon's brand pops, the Nike brand. They're playing great football under Dan Lanning. So a lot of reasons why he chose Oregon. As soon as he backed off that commitment, again, Tennessee moved back to the front of that list, back to the top of the number one contender. And then slowly things kind of started to favor, Vanderbilt. Then Miami, Ohio State got involved, but Tennessee just kept playing the long game, talking to Keyshawn, talking to his mom, talking about why he could be a focal point, a wide receiver one in the Tennessee offense, talking about how Kelsey Pope has put a receiver into the NFL draft each of the last 3 seasons, how he can be that guy, getting him back on campus this spring, continue to build that relationship. In the end, I think he kind of just went where his heart was from the very beginning, and that's to go to Knoxville and play for the Tennessee Volunteers.
Yeah, really exciting recruitment. Good to see it come full circle for Tennessee, but they're not done with emphasizing in-state recruiting. Who are some other names that Tennessee fans need to know when it comes to in-state recruiting?
I mean, there's a long list, Josh, but could we start anywhere else but 5-star running back DGG, David Gabriel Georges from Baylor School down there in Chattanooga, obviously via Canada. He's a Canadian guy, been down in the United States for 3 years now and really kind of starting to learn about the recruiting process. I mean, look, he's going to be probably one of the most highest paid skill position guys in the NIL era this cycle. So we know it's going to be a battle from multiple power programs, Tennessee being the one, the in-state school close to where he lives now at the Baylor School. Tennessee has many connections to that program. And then you have Ohio State right there as well. We see right now, look, there's plenty of other schools that want to get visits, likely will get OVs and be part of this process. But right now it's Ohio State versus Tennessee. There's some confidence on both sides, but we know Tennessee will have a hat on the table when that decision is made. They will do all in their power to make sure he ends up with Volunteers. He'll be a very interesting 5-star running back to watch in the coming months. I need to look at my notes because there's so many in-state guys we can talk about, from Legacy Kenneth Simon to Vanderbilt flip target Amari Sanders to running back Asa Barnes, his teammate, cornerback Miles Brown at Westview. Safety in Knoxville, Halls High School, Jarrell Chandler. He was back in Knoxville earlier this week. Tay Walden, a wide receiver from in-state programs. Malik Howard, 30 minutes away at Oak Ridge, a tight end. They're going to do some major damage, in that home state this year. They got a big one just a few days ago in Keyshawn Bowman. All eyes are on DGG. But look, Malik Howard, I would say Tennessee has the edge. Safety Jarrell Chandler, I put an RPM in for him to go to Tennessee earlier this week. Did the same for Miles Brown, a cornerback from Westview. Plays with Ty Simpson's little brother, Graham Simpson. So a lot of meat still on that bone in the state of Tennessee. I think they'll have a lot more success in the coming weeks, the coming months in their home state.
Yeah, and I feel like Josh Heupel's done a great job of taking the top talent in state every year, making a point of emphasis to keep these homegrown talents in state, in Knoxville. So we'll see what happens with DGG. I know he's the big name on the board, but what else around the country do you feel like Tennessee fans should keep an eye on when it comes to top names?
Yeah, I mean, a big name right there in South Carolina, neighboring state, Nate Carson. He's a guy that's been there multiple times. I think Tennessee has the lead there. A name I'm hearing a lot more about since the spring visit, wide receiver Osani Gales, plays at IMG Academy. He's from out there in Los Angeles. You know, I live in Georgia. One of the top DBs in this state is Tashawn Poole, a safety on campus right now as we record this. Josh, Tennessee's been setting the pace, recently adding LSU offer, was at A&M too, at Alabama, different schools involved there, but Tennessee has been setting that pace. And then a guy like Flip Target, I mentioned Amari Sanders, in-state Flip Target, and out-of-state Flip Target from Alabama, Alabama commit, but from Georgia, cornerback Marcus Nash, and for me, I would say that he's leaning away from, I said Marcus Nash, former Tennessee commit, excuse me, Nash Johnson is the cornerback from Georgia, committed to Alabama. But I think right now he's trending away from Alabama, whether it be Tennessee, maybe Miami. But look, they're going to rack up, I think, in-state, then put those key pieces together with those in-state wins from out-of-state national targets as well. Like you mentioned, Josh Heupel, I think one of the best when it comes to head coaches and building relationships, staying in communication consistently. I think he deserves a lot of credit for a lot of their wins on the recruiting trail. Yes, other staff members are involved. Tennessee has a lot to sell as a program, but Heupel, very real, very genuine, gets to know these recruits in-state and out-of-state. In the end, that's why they win a lot of these battles.
Yeah, Nash Johnson, he's flipping somewhere. I know you mentioned Tennessee and Miami. He was on campus at Florida. I know those writers felt good about where the Gators stand. Then he went to Auburn. Those writers felt good about where the Tigers stood. So he's flipping somewhere. We'll see. Maybe it's Tennessee. Maybe it's somewhere else. But Tennessee fans, you can feel the momentum starting to build. We're getting into the recruiting months. Really doesn't truly heat up until June, July, and August, but currently sitting inside that top 15. Who's your top target on the board as we head into these recruiting months? Let me know. Comment section below.